The forest stretched before Silver like a fever dream made manifest. Twisted trees rose hundreds of feet into the perpetual twilight, their trunks broader than the crystal towers of Astralin. But where his homeland's spires rose with mathematical precision, these giants writhed in defiance of natural law. Their bark resembled flayed flesh, pulsing with veins of corruption that carried iridescent sap through tortured channels. 2 weeks had passed since he'd mastered the ancient chamber's teachings. In that time, he'd grown accustomed to the weight of shadow that now lived in his flesh, to the intricate patterns that marked him as something neither fully high elven nor purely darkness. The shadow crown had become as natural as breathing, its elaborate configurations of pure darkness responding to his will like an extension of his body. He moved through the corrupted woodland with predatory grace, each step precise and silent despite the treacherous ground. Pools of luminescent liquid dotted the forest floor, their surfaces reflecting impossible colors when disturbed. The air itself felt thick with potential violence, carrying scents that had no names in any mortal tongue. His quarry wasn't difficult to track. Something large had passed through recently, leaving a trail of accelerated corruption in its wake. Where these creatures moved, the forest's usual taint intensified exponentially. Crystal growths erupted from the ground like frozen explosions, and even the ever-present twisted vegetation recoiled from their passing. But what caught Silver's attention wasn't the destruction, it was the pattern behind it. These weren't the mindless wanderings of typical corrupted beasts. The trail showed purpose, doubling back on itself at times, creating false leads that would confuse less experienced trackers. Whatever he hunted possessed intelligence, and that made it far more dangerous. The Rosser blade hung ready at his hip, its transformed metal humming in harmony with the shadows that wreathed his form. He'd learned to maintain a perfect balance between his dual natures, mostly high elven in appearance but suffused with shadow power, ready to shift in an instant should the need arise. The sword had evolved with him, becoming a conduit for both his martial skill and his newfound abilities. Near midday, though time held little meaning under the corruption-choked sky, he found their first kill site. A corrupted deer lay half-consumed, its crystalline antlers shattered and its iridescent flesh torn by massive claws. But the precision of the attack told him more about his quarry. The creature's throat had been torn out with surgical accuracy, and the feeding had been methodical rather than frenzied. Silver knelt beside the carcass, letting his shadow senses extend through the area. The darkness responded eagerly, flowing out like invisible tendrils to paint a picture of what had transpired. 3 distinct sets of tracks, far larger than natural. The way they moved suggested coordination, pack tactics executed with disturbing intelligence. Not simple beasts, he murmured, watching the shadows recreate phantom images of the hunters. Something new. The trail led deeper into the forest, where the trees grew so densely that their corrupted forms merged into tunnel-like passages. Crystal growths became more prevalent, their surfaces reflecting his shadow-wreathed form in countless fractured images. The air grew heavier, charged with some nameless energy that made his skin prickle beneath its marks of darkness. He found the second kill site an hour later. This one was fresher, blood still seeping into the corrupt soil. But something was different here. Among the beast tracks, he found others, human boot prints, desperately fleeing. Most concerning were the drag marks that followed, leading away into the crystal-choked undergrowth. Silver's expression hardened. Whatever these creatures were, they had graduated from corrupt wildlife to human prey. That could not be allowed to continue. He followed the new trail with increased urgency, noting how the forest seemed to change around him. The corruption remained intense, but here and there he spotted crude attempts to fight it back. Wooden barriers had been erected between some trees, treated with substances that seemed to slow the spread of taint. Remnants of torches suggested regular patrols. Then he found the first body. A human male, relatively young, dressed in practical leather armor that had offered no protection against what killed him. The precision of the wounds matched the deer carcass, a single tear to the throat, followed by methodical feeding. But this kill was different in one crucial aspect: it had been staged, positioned deliberately as a warning or a lure. Silver's heightened senses screamed a warning just as shadows exploded from his form. He shifted to pure darkness as massive crystalline claws tore through the space where he had been standing. 3 enormous shapes dropped from the corrupted canopy above, moving with impossible grace for their size. They had once been bears, that much was clear. But corruption had doubled their mass while replacing much of their flesh with crystalline growths that pulsed with inner light. Muscles rippled beneath fur that shimmered with iridescent patterns, and their eyes held cruel intelligence that had no place in natural beasts. More disturbing was their reaction to his shadow form. Rather than confusion, they showed recognition. The largest of the 3 actually laughed, a sound that should have been impossible with its crystalline throat. "The demon's gift serves you well, little elf," it growled, voice grating like broken glass. "But you are not the only one he blessed with awareness." Silver remained in shadow form, assessing his opponents. The 3 corrupted bears moved with unnatural coordination, spreading out to surround him. Their crystalline growths formed natural armor, and corruption had enhanced their already formidable strength. But it was their intelligence that posed the greatest threat. "Valkyr's touch brings only corruption," he replied, his voice echoing strangely in shadow form. "What you call awareness is merely the death of what you once were." The leader's crystalline maw twisted in what might have been a smile. Bold words from one who wears the demon's marks so proudly. It nodded to its companions, and they began to close the circle. "We will show you true transformation." They attacked as one, each beast taking a different angle. The leader went high, crystal claws raking through the air while its companions struck low, trying to catch him between their charges. Their coordination was flawless, the product of countless successful hunts. But Silver was no simple prey. He shifted between forms with liquid grace, shadow to avoid the high attack, solid to meet the first low charge with the Rosser blade. The sword sang through the air, its edge wreathed in pure darkness. Where it struck crystalline flesh, corruption was not just cut but consumed, converted into clean shadow energy that he could wield. The wounded bear roared in genuine pain and fear. It had never faced something that could purify corruption before. Its companions hesitated for a crucial moment, recognizing a fundamental threat to their existence. Silver pressed his advantage, shadows exploding from his form in a deadly storm. The crown manifested in its full glory, darkness wrapping around him like royal regalia. Each strike of his blade drank deeper of the creature's corrupt essence, strengthening his own powers. The bears adapted quickly, showing their terrible intelligence. They began coordinating their attacks with the crystal growths around them, using corrupted vegetation as additional weapons. Massive thorns launched through the air while crystal sheets rose from the ground, trying to trap him in physical form. "You cannot purify all of us," the leader snarled, its voice distorting as it called upon deeper corruption. Its form began to change, crystal merging with flesh until it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. "The taint runs too deep." "We shall see," Silver answered, fully embracing his dual nature. He moved like living night, the Rosser blade leaving trails of solid shadow that cut through corruption as if it were mist. Each strike stole more of their essence, converting it to pure power that made the patterns on his skin pulse with new intensity. The battle drove them through the twisted forest, corrupted trees cracking and shattering as massive bodies were thrown against them. Crystal thorns filled the air, forcing Silver to shift rapidly between forms. But with each change, each touch of his shadow-enhanced blade, the bear's coordination began to falter. The first fell when its crystal armor finally shattered, purified by repeated contact with shadow energy. Its corrupted form dissolved, leaving behind only clean darkness that Silver's powers absorbed. The second followed shortly after, caught between shadow tendrils and the Rosser blade's purifying edge. The leader, seeing its companions reduced to pure shadow, unleashed its full corruption. Crystal erupted from every surface of its body, forming a jagged cocoon of corrupt power. When it emerged, it had transformed into something that barely resembled its original form, a behemoth of crystal and pulsing flesh that towered 20 feet high. "This is true power," it roared, corruption spreading from its feet like a tide. "This is what awaits all things." Silver's response was not in words. The shadow crown flared with new intensity as he called upon everything he had learned. Darkness gathered around him like a storm, responding to his will with perfect precision. The Rosser blade hummed with concentrated power, shadow and steel becoming one. Their final clash shook the corrupted forest. Crystal met shadow-forged weapons while purifying energy battled tainted flesh. The bear's new form gave it incredible strength, but Silver's powers had grown with each victory. Where corruption touched his shadows, it was consumed and transformed. The end came suddenly. The leader, believing its crystal armor impenetrable, committed fully to a crushing blow. Silver shifted to pure shadow, flowing through the creature's defenses like smoke. When he solidified, the Rosser blade struck true, finding the core of corruption that powered its transformations. The beast's roar turned to a scream as shadow energy coursed through its massive form, purifying thousands of years of accumulated taint. Crystal shattered, corrupt flesh dissolved, and in the end, only pure darkness remained. Silver absorbed this power too, feeling it strengthen and refine his abilities. As silence returned to the forest, he became aware of watching eyes. The crude barriers he'd noticed earlier now made sense. There were settlements nearby, humans who had learned to survive in this corrupt landscape. They had witnessed his battle, seen him consume and purify corruption itself.